Yo, guys, what is up? Mux in a Wonderlands video, and today we're going over Subsonic. This is a movement speed build that is able to achieve ridiculous damage via movement speed. We are very, very fast on this class, and we're scaling basically all of our damage off of our movement speed. This build clears Chaos Chambers very quickly. It's got ridiculous boss damage, and it's an absolute blast to play, so I hope you guys enjoy the build. Let's get right into it. I just want to give you guys like a damage, I guess a damage demonstration of the damage this build puts out real quick. And then we'll get into the rest of the stuff. But like, as you can see, my shotgun hits for about 1,000,000 a pellet. 1,000,000 a pellet when we set up our damage correctly, which is just disgusting DPS. Because the shotgun fires very quickly, and every one of these shots are hitting about 1,000,000. So we're going to start with an overview of the build, and then we'll get into the gear and the skill tree. And the absolute star of this show is the Selective Amnesia class mod. Now, this Amnesia class mod reads, after taking non-status effect damage, apply a fire status effect to the Fate Maker, increasing their movement speed, and you leave a fire trail for 3 seconds. While this effect is active, damage dealt is increased by movement speed. And this is one-to-one scaling, and as far as I can tell, it doesn't have a cap on it, meaning per percentage increase in movement speed, you get a per increase in all damage dealt. So for example, just by having this movement speed on this class mod, this is actually 23% all damage dealt. And with this build, we're able to achieve over 200% movement speed. That means with this build, whenever we take damage, we just shoot up over 200% damage, and that's just kind of the start of it. So that's kind of the overview of the build, and we're going to be speccing around keeping our movement speed up and doing crazy amounts of damage. Now, the one thing that you should know about the Amnesia that's super cool is you don't actually have to be moving. Any percentage increases to your movement speed count as you moving, so you can actually be standing completely still, and as long as you have a lot of movement speed buffs active, you're going to be getting all that damage dealt. It still benefits you to move around with this build, but yeah, it's super cool. And if you're familiar with like Driver Amara or Zane from Borderlands 3, this build plays like a Zane build or a Driver Amara shotgun build, which is a lot of fun. So you could make this build work with a few different character class combinations. I'm actually going to have an Amnesia Graveborn build out soon, but I wanted to show this off because this Stabbomancer Berserker class mod is one of the class mods that spec into a bunch of movement speed skills. In fact, I'm getting points into haste, which with my, I could get 6 out of 3 here, which would be awesome, but with just my 5 out of 3, I'm getting 20% movement speed at base, and then whenever I cast a spell, I get that bonus doubled. So this alone is 40% movement speed, plus this class mod also specs into Cold Snap, which gives me frost efficiency plus movement speed, which is then doubled whenever I'm enraged, aka activate my action skill, or I'm killing enemies, and I'm basically always going to be enraged. So this is another 30% movement speed. So just off of these alone, I cast a spell and I kill an enemy, I've got 70% movement speed. Then with Swift Death, I'm going to be dealing increased damage per my movement speed, which once again, we're going to be moving very quickly. And so this build achieves very fast movement speed and a ton of damage. Now, the only place that you can actually roll movement speed as a passive is on your actual class mod. You cannot roll it on rings, you cannot roll it on your amulet, but you can roll some movement speed things. So for example, I have this Red Hellion that after getting a gun kill gained 20% melee damage and 30% movement speed for 5 seconds. Remember, you have to think of this movement speed as all damage dealt. This is 30% extra damage via movement speed, and when it's activated, you don't actually have to be moving. As long as it's activated, you get that 30% movement speed. You're gonna get that 30% all damage. I'm sorry my UI isn't like showing up properly, but let's talk about the rest of the gear. So my favorite weapon for this build is the Red Hellion. I've got a few with different enchants on it. One of the ones I really like, honestly, is the reloading during From the Shadows extends its duration by 2 seconds. We're going to be in From the Shadows. It is a little bit anti-synergistic that we're going to be in From the Shadows, and like we need to be taking damage for this to activate, but I found in the Chaos Chambers with all the like the random effects that happen, the modifiers on the floor, enemies hitting me, I'm honestly constantly getting this Amnesia. And the one thing that part of the reason I picked Berserker for the Amnesia is because Berserker's got some of the best sustain in the game, and you're going to be taking damage and getting hurt hard by this fire dot, so you want to be able to stay alive. So that's part of the reason I picked Berserker. But for our gear, we're using a Red Hellion. The Red Hellion gets more pellets the faster your movement speed. So the Red Hellion is a perfect weapon because the faster we're moving, once again, you don't actually have to be moving fast. You just need to have percentage increases. The Red Hellion works perfect with this build. I'm using a Peg Leg with Peg Leg and Echo. The Peg Leg gives me 30% movement speed and 40% reload speed. This is a big chunk of movement speed and reload speed, which is beautiful for us because we're constantly reloading the Red Hellion, and when we're using this enchant with the Red Hellion, we're going to get extended time in from the shadows, and we've got Berserker Capstone to give us extended time in from the shadows whenever we kill an enemy, so we're in from the shadows a lot. For my spell, I'm using a Buffmeister. The reason I'm using a Buffmeister is because the Buffmeister gives me a ton of movement speed. The Buffmeister will scale with its like chaos thing. So like a chaotic Buffmeister will give less movement speed than a volatile. A volatile Buffmeister, doesn't really matter which one you get. I recommend getting Pew and a Buffmeister, but if you can get a volatile Buffmeister, it's 85% movement speed. So I'm getting a huge chunk of damage from Buffmeister just because I'm going to get that movement speed, but I'm also going to get that extra damage. So Buffmeister is like a really, really good spell for this. The amulet I'm using is the Urge with a frost damage Berserker. And the reason I'm using the Urge is because I want to be in from the shadows as much as possible. So whenever I cast a spell, which we're going to be casting a lot, I get extra cooldown. This really isn't necessary, though. I'm going to be honest with you. It's just the best amulet that I have. With Blood of the Fallen, you could go for just about anything here. If you're thinking you're lacking some survivability, a Skeep can be really nice to give you that health gate to keep you alive, when you go below health. But yeah, the Urge is what I've got. But once again, definitely not needed just because Blood of the Fallen is going to give us so much cooldown just by killing enemies. If that was a bit confusing, showing on screen is all of the gear that I run for this build. Now, a lot of this footage is showing off the Red Hellion. The Red Hellion is my favorite weapon for this build, but some other recommendations. The Last Rites unique blue shotgun is unbelievably strong on this build. The Cryo Automagic is really good. The Fragment Rain SMG is really good. A Cryo Sawmill works really well for bossing, and Cryo Torg weapons also work really, really well with this build. But yeah, I was highlighting the Cryo Red Hellion for this build. Any Cryo weapon you can make work, but Cryo Red Hellion gives you more pellets based on movement speed. We're a movement speed build. It just fits perfectly. For the skill tree here, I'm spec'd into Arsenal for melee damage and gun damage, Haste for movement speed and melee attack speed, Swift Death for the faster I move, the more damage I deal, Exploit their weakness for whenever I apply a status effect to an enemy. I'm going to get a damage increase on them. This works off of one element or one weapon. So some people have been confused on this. If I'm using a Red Hellion, for example, and I'm shooting an enemy, if the Red Hellion procs a cryo effect on an enemy, and they get dotted, and I keep shooting at them, and it procs another cryo dot or status effect on them, that'll count as another stack. You don't see double stacks. The dot doesn't double up. You'll only ever see one dot, but refreshing that dot duration counts as a new stack of Exploit Their Weakness. So even though I'm mainly just using Cryo here, I am getting stacks of Exploit Their Weakness. We're also using a Body Rune, which will give me bonus fire damage, so that also helps. And if you really were worried about it, you could use a Buffmeister that is other than Cryo, so that you get another status effect. But yeah, Exploit Their Weakness works just off of one element. And then I'm using Elusive, which is going to allow me to shoot and sprint, which works really well here. And it gives us a chance to just avoid damage while we're running around, which is also pretty nice. This can be counterintuitive a little bit to the Amnesia. I've found that the Amnesia procs just fine with it. But yeah, Elusive is very cool because it allows us to shoot and sprint and then sneak attack for a little bit more crit damage while we're in from the shadows. And then we get to our Berserker tree. Now, this Berserker Capstone, whenever we kill an enemy, we extend our duration of From the Shadows. Allows us to be in From the Shadows a ton of time. This build's got great survivability because of that. And then we've got Icebreaker to give us more damage against frozen enemies, Cold Snap for more frost efficiency and movement speed, and Cesspool Frost for more frost damage. The old ways, we're using shotguns, so we're always going to be up close to enemies. Unarmored Defense is an amazing skill because we're focusing on healing. Instinct is a must-have. Literally, please spec this skill. Reload speed and weapon swap speed when you're in rage, this effect is doubled. You're reloading a lot, and we're also, for a lot of the time, using you can use whatever you'd like. You can use the 30% movement speed or use the reloading from the shadows, increase the time that you're in from the shadows. But being able to reload faster is a huge DPS increase because you're able to shoot more. I got 1 point in Iron Squall. I don't really need the fire rate. If I'm using a Red Hellion, it already fires ridiculously fast. And then Capstone. All right, for our hero points. For our character power, we're going a bit into Stabbomancer power and a bit into Berserker power. The reason you want Stabbomancer power is it's going to give you a base increase to From the Shadows. With 0 Stabbomancer power, From the Shadows feels really, really short. So definitely want to get some Stabbomancer power. And then the Berserker power will give us a ton of extra damage via bonus frost damage whenever we're enraged. And then for our actual hero points, I recommend going Village Idiot. We're maxing out crit damage. We want as much crit damage as possible because we're going to be in From the Shadows a lot. I actually went Intelligence for spell cooldown. A lot of my movement speed and a lot of my damage is from haste. This is 40% movement speed, and so being able to use my spell as often as possible is really, really nice for that, as well as my spell, which is the Buffmeister, also gives me 85% movement speed, plus extra fire rate, plus gun handling, plus, like, it's just so nice to have spell cooldown on this build. And then lastly, I actually went for HP and Ward because we need to take damage to do damage, and if you take damage and die, it's not really going to help you because you won't be able to do damage. So we need at least enough HP and health to take a few hits so that we can dish out as much damage as possible. And yeah, guys, that is kind of it for the build. For like actual bossing rotations, I use the Twisted Delusion. This is going to apply Soaked for me, and soaked enemies take 50% more damage from frost, which I'm using frost. So I'll basically soak an enemy and then either wait to get hit or get hit myself. For bossing, I do use a Cursed Whip. Cursed Whip's going to give me 100% increased damage. That 100% increased damage works with our over 200% increased damage that we're getting just from our Amnesia, not to mention the other things. Plus, we've got Swift Death for scaling off of our movement speed. So we're getting absurd damage. That's why this build is able to do bossing so well. But yeah, shoot the Twisted Delusion, wait for your shield to break, get that Cursed Whip for 100% increased damage, get hit to increase your damage by 200%, and then just blast away at your enemies. It's pretty ridiculous. Just a short build video. This build video was a little bit more casual than the other ones. I have like a lot of builds that I'd like to put out, and this one didn't have like quite the crazy like intro and stuff like that, but I just wanted to show off this build because I've been having a lot of fun with it. It will be in the Discord. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you on the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.